And now we're live.
See what here. This is best work. Okay. The one that's right here. ESG.
I gotta get
Right there, that's, you have to want that's best work.
It's so weird. Yeah, this is the slapstick comedy on the entire conference, right?
So,
I think we're live.
yeah,
Okay, you wanna kick us off?
so I'm still, was looking at this to figure out so we are live back in the conference committee on 454 on May 30th, Friday, May 30th. We have,
Can I say something before we get started with proposals? I'm sorry. I spent our interim time meeting with JFO and Professor Colby and APA and some folks in the administration and just really like had a few meetings like this, but really just trying to get everyone on the same page about the assumptions as numbers are being compared. And I think they're getting much closer to understanding each other's assumptions and sort of how the foundation formula being used and the special education money would not result in higher spending. And so some of it might still need some attention that they're not going to be able to resolve today. And so might need to put in some contingent language upon, so just sort of want to offer that. I'm excited that they've gotten so close to much clearer numbers and better matching the expectations that I've been going into this with, but
this is just regarding the cost of special education.
no, it's the cost of the cost to essentially the whole system of education in this, if this was enacted, knowing that there are hundreds and hundreds of assumptions of decisions we have not made yet that we will make in out years and significant work the administration is going to need to be doing with our school districts. But I think we're getting closer to everyone agreeing on those numbers, and that is great.
Great.
Sorry, back to you. Senator Bunker.
So if we start with, that's the one that says 1 of 5, I'm sorry.
Section 1.
Page 1 of 5 and section 1. The first change is the July 1, 26, and that's kind of backing into what it would take to be able to get the system up and running in the FY29 school year. And so larger district boundaries would be effective July 1, 26. That is going to require that we get there next year. So, and then we ended up with a on page 2, and I think that the word March is a bit of a placeholder, but because we're talking about a special election in March of 27 to get the system up and running. That does not presuppose that's where we're staying. I think we've all heard the Secretary of State talk about how the November elections would make more sense on an ongoing basis. But to back into getting this thing up and running, we began to think that having a special election was probably the way to do it. The Secretary of State could get out the ballots, and so that's March or April, frankly, at 27, something like that. And then the July 1, 28 date, new school districts assuming responsibility. So up and running on July 1, 28. So then on page 3, this is the section we've been kind of talked about on and off, notwithstanding subsection.
Oh, it's just page 3 of your, sorry, can you give me a second?
Yeah. Actually, we could also have that come up and run us through. Why don't we do that? So I feel we should do this.
What? Sorry.
We can have Beth walk us through the changes. No. So on her.
Up to you.
Yeah, let's do that. Page 1 of 5, and we can
St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. Would you like me to share my screen?
Sure, for the public.
Okay, this is the Senate conferee's proposal to the education policy sections. If the language is highlighted in yellow, that means it is proposed change to language. If the language is not highlighted, it is my understanding that that language has been agreed to tentatively. Section 1, just to orient you, you can see that I have referenced House Draft 4.1 and the corresponding page numbers.
So I didn't notice that before. Thank you. That is so helpful.
You've already gone over section 1. So the next change that is being proposed is to section 11, prohibition on school closure and transition to paying tuition. That corresponds to House Draft 4.1, pages 36, should be 37, not 27. No changes are being proposed to subsection A. Subsection B is new. Notwithstanding subsection A, if a school district closes a public school in a geographically isolated area as defined by the State Board of Education, or the school district is adjacent to a school district that tuitions its students in the same grades as the closed school as of July 1, 2025, the school district that is closing the school may tuition its affected resident students.
So this is a departure from the language that you previously proposed and that we mostly accepted, other than throwing in a state board check. Could you talk a little bit about what's changing?
Well, we were trying to narrow it, to tailor it to, at one of our meetings, you all had mentioned the possibility that, one district could do this and then neighboring district and neighboring district. And we thought that was a good argument. And so we were trying to, narrow it down by including this date as of July 1st. So, for example, I don't know, if Twinfield decided to close Twinfield High School, they would not be able to take advantage of this because they are not adjacent to town that tuitions their high school grades. By putting this as of July 1st, 2025, that guarantees that regardless of what any district next to them might do going forward, I don't even know if any of them could, that they would not be able to take advantage of B.
Okay. Maybe give me an example then of one that could. And
Okay, one that I'm familiar with in my area is, for example, Danville. Danville is adjacent to Walden, it's adjacent to St. Johnsbury. Hypothetically, if Danville decided to close their 9 through 12, since they're neighboring those two adjacent districts, also tuition 9 through 12, then they would fit into B. They would satisfy the second part. I don't think they would be determined to be geographically isolated. I think geographically isolated is Canaan, something along those lines, yeah.
okay.
This seems like an expansion of what you proposed before, not a narrowing of what you proposed before, but it's adjacent that feels like narrowing, or the same.
Well, we first one we came out with adjacent as an idea. And then The second, we talked about the idea of, is in close proximity, which recognizes not a legal definition. And that didn't seem to, maybe there was too much vagueness in that. And so, and there was also the comment, I can't remember if it was the first or second, about the, we don't want to set up the situation where it kind of unfolds over a larger from town to town type of thing. Did I imagine that?
I don't remember anyone saying that.
Yeah, and I didn't understand the concept.
I suppose, I mean, I thought I heard somebody say, well, what happens if they do it and then the next down and the next down?
Yeah, you can go that issue.
Yeah, and I was,
I
okay.
did?
Somebody.
Yeah, I
Somebody
definitely
did.
did.
Anyhow, whether you did or not, I think it's a fair point. And so by putting this as July 1 of 2025, that would block that possibility from.
A domino effect.
Yeah, which was not what we were intending to do anyhow, but I think that would clearly prevent that from happening.
Also has the advantage of just being simple.
Sure.
I mean, it's very narrow. This would only probably, I don't even know if it would apply to a handful of towns in the state of Vermont.
So then, not much different here. We're just keep going with, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
I feel like there,
yes.
I mean, I can think of dozens off the top of my head. But maybe I'm misunderstanding your language.
Okay, yeah, I don't know Wyndham County as well as you do, obviously, or.
I mean, Wyndham County has some of the lowest tuition in the state, so that's why I'm like, if I can think of dozens off the top of my head, I'm extrapolating that there must be dozens more that I'm not thinking of, but we can look at a map at
Okay.
some point.
Well, let me just ask this. If, is Bennington adjacent to Manchester?
No.
But what is? Arlington.
Arlington.
So this would say if Arlington closed its high school because they're adjacent to a non-operating high school town, that they would then become a tuitioning town as well.
No, they could, they wouldn't have to.
Yeah, they could go the other
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, they could come part of Mount Anthony Union, or I don't know what else is. Yeah. No, this would
It's
not,
a little hard to sort of get a grasp on.
Yeah, sure.
Serious understanding of.
but it's not meant to force a school to do this, or a district to do this. Yeah, it's.
And, sorry,
Moving on to section 21, which corresponds to House Draft 4.1, pages 52 to 53. The amendment to section 828 in Title 16, tuition to approved school. The proposal here is to remove an independent school meeting education quality standards as an eligible school for tuition purposes. And also to require that at least 25% of schools, approved independent schools, Vermont resident student enrollment is composed of students attending on a publicly funded basis.
And how is that different than the original proposal?
this
Which-
was.
Oh, this is just back to your original proposal.
No,
EQS.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
So the
Yeah.
only change is that you would eliminate an independent school meeting education quality standards.
That's a way
No.
to,
Not part of the original
additional way to gain
What?
tuition.
that's current law.
Correct.
Yeah, it's,
Do you know how many schools that eliminate?
that,
Doesn't eliminate any, it would per se, it would just
block.
be a way, it would keep other schools from using that as a way to, because the whole point here was to narrow it to those areas where it's integral. This would keep an independent school in a different part of the state from being able to receive tuition via the vehicle of meeting education quality standards. It actually narrows.
so just think of an example. The Waldorf School, I think, which is in Shelburne, which I think is an approved independent that receives tuition. According to the, they would no longer be able to accept public tuition because they are located within a district that is fully operating. Okay. However, according to this, the way the language was set up, they would have had the option of continuing to receive public tuition if they decided to meet the education quality standards. So they could have continued, okay? This would prevent them from doing that.
It's just another means to affect what we were trying to affect.
Okay, now, this is challenging, because not really sure what the implications are on actually schools that are independent schools by virtue of being, meeting educational quality standards.
Yeah, it would block them from using that mechanism to come back in and qualify.
Yeah, I mean, it ties to other things. There are certain benefits that come along with being in.
Oh, yeah, it's a decision that there's other things that go along with it. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of, the tie between, can you speak to the tie between the other benefits that go along with being an approved independent school based on EQS?
I don't think that I would describe it as benefits, but I can describe what would be required. So currently, education quality standards only apply to public schools. And those are things like meeting all of the state board requirements for curriculum and graduation requirements, et cetera, having licensed teachers, essentially everything that public schools are required to do. And being an approved independent school that meets education quality standards means that that independent school is following all of those same laws and rules.
Wouldn't mean they couldn't still do that if they want to, but it wouldn't be a means for staying as an independent school. They have to meet the other thresholds that we set up.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have a sense of how many, like I said, I'm not all that familiar with independent schools. Do you have a sense of how many independent schools have right now meet education quality
I
standards
believe it's two.
in the whole state?
Yeah. But this would,
And they would both continue to qualify, by the way.
In other ways?
in other ways, yeah, they would. But this, this would prevent an independent school from, if they're blocked from public tuition,
Mhm.
they could say, hey, if we want back in,
Okay.
we can satisfy education quality standards, then we're back in. This would prevent them from doing that.
You know, if any schools are in the process of independent schools are in the process of moving towards EQS, or is anybody even
I'm not aware. I think so. That's another nice. You guys. Tuition section.
Anything you want to do?
This is it from me.
Yep.
Thanks, Beth.
Tuition.
John or Kirby?
I think we're going in order through the bill. It would be section 27 before section 60.
Perfect. So, John.
Do you happen to know what page?
Section 27 in the 4.1.
I'm sure. I believe it's page 58. Hello. John Gray, I'm the President Council. And there we go. I don't have as useful of like page annotations, and I have a much thinner header. But my doc is 30 pages long, so with some more things here. So the first section we're talking about here, this is going to make more sense when we come to later sections, but section 27 is your tuition section. And the way that it's been talked about colloquially is money following the student, right? So this is districts sending to receiving schools amounts equal to the base multiplied by the sum of one and any weights applicable to that student. The structure that you're going to see proposed here is allowing school districts to vote down below the foundation amount. And so in accompanying that change, the tuition would need to be prorated to correspond to whatever that school district's voted down amount is. So that's your approved percentage. Like I said, this will make more sense once we come to later sections, but just know that this is a conforming change to make sure that the tuition for money following the student tracks what the school district votes to spend. And you see the proviso there, provided that a district that operates no grades would pay out 8%. And I think this is included, I'm sure the senators can speak to this, to ensure that folks who don't have as much incentive to vote for higher figures can't take advantage of other districts that would have to cover the cost of educating that student and would vote down to say 90% because they had no incentive to.
Does this also apply to the transition period?
There would be no transition.
Ah, okay, I will wait. You said to wait, and I will wait, John.
It'll make sense,
Yep.
or maybe not.
Don't jump.
I'll do my best to explain how it makes sense. So you're not going to see all sections here, but I did try to include most of sections 34 through 52, even where there wasn't a direct ask to do something. I at least wanted to call out what the section was and say no position is taken here. Section 34 is amending your Title 16 definitions. So what you're seeing is the introduction of this concept of approved percentage. This is the percentage of foundation amount, which we'll come to shortly, approved by the voters of the school district, provided that the voters shall only approve percentage within the range of 90 to 100%. So this is allowing a school district to vote down below that foundation amount, down to 90%. The next change that you see is for the base amount. This is using the $14,541 figure. That was what passed Senate Finance. So when we come to the weighting sections, you're going to see weights that accompany that weight, but just know that you're using base and weights. So inputs to a foundation formula that come from Senate Finance's amendment.
Quick question, I'm sorry, you may have just said it. So 14,541 is 90% of.
No,
Okay.
nope.
And this is, just to note, this is well outside the bounds of the two proposals that are on the table.
Yeah, and I think,
Just.
Yeah.
Need to say it.
You may feel that way throughout 30 pages.
Thank you, John.
It's also not the first time we've done it.
Just trying to note it whenever we are.
So I'm going to describe 19 first, and then I'll come back to what the EOP is in this concept. So 19, foundation amount, that's the base amount multiplied by the school district's weighted long-term membership. In the concepts that we've talked about up to this point, that would typically be your EOP, but because we're building in a concept for payments up to school districts that would reflect a voted percentage, the foundation amount is now that figure. And so your EOP is still the payment to a school district, but what that is it's the product of that school district's foundation amount, so base times weighted long-term membership, and the approved percentage, which is giving you that, say, 90% of the foundation amount, if that's what the school district so voted, 95, whatever it might be. Section 34A.
Wait, one more
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Just one
So
more time.
just to call out why I changed the definition of educational opportunity payment, I would have had to have changed all the references throughout the chapter where payments of educational opportunity payments are made to be something else. And so what the educational opportunity payment is it is what is being paid to a school district. And what the concept it reflects is the base times weighted long-term membership, which is what in the House proposal would be your EOP, but it's multiplied by whatever that percentage a school district votes is. So the EOP is the product of your approved percentage and your foundation amount. And basically it gives you 90% of your, in the House proposal, that would be called the EOP. Does that make sense?
And the foundation amount is what we used to call the EOP?
Yes,
Thank you.
exactly. Yes. Section 34A, this speaks to the transition question. And so what you're going to see here is that the approved percentage range, as we just talked about, that approved percentage range was 90 to 100%, right? And what you're seeing is in the first years of the rollout, and just note here that this begins in FY29. So it's a different timeline than the House has been talking about. So in each of fiscal years 29 through 33, the minimum percentage that could be that approved percentage would be as follows. So in your first year of that foundation formula level FY 29, it could be 85%, and then you're increasing by 1% each year until in fiscal year 2034, you have reached that 90% floor. So this is a transition mechanism for the lower end of the how you're paying up educational opportunity payments.
Senator Margaret, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but are you then adding sort of a 15% transition mechanism on the other side as well?
You know, the.
From the top to the.
No, we kept
Okay,
yours.
great.
Thought about
Section 35, this is your weighting section. So hopefully this, at least the titles here are going to look pretty familiar, but just to call out what I was saying before with the change of the base in Title 16, you're going to see the weights here are the Senate Finance proposed weights. I had tried to highlight, admittedly, I did this off the top of my head in a rush to just call out what I believe are the differences between the weights. So maybe it's helpful to describe there are no special education weights included here. There are distinguished EL weights, right? That's for your English language proficiency levels, a newcomer or slight. The House proposal, it had sparsity and small school support grants. Those are not included here. Instead, you have, as you may recall, a weight for small schools, and that small school weight picks up a little bit of the sparsity consideration because it's only those that have fewer than 55 students per square mile. But hopefully this is not a new concept. This is the Senate Finance weights. Happy to pause if helpful, but I hope that this will mainly look.
Well, to some of us, it does not. So this is getting rid of the sparsity language that we all seem to be in agreement about, and now we're moving to a small school weight.
We didn't have that.
No, we're okay with your spurs. I don't know.
I don't need that.
The ask was for the Senate Finance weights. These are those weights. I can.
Okay,
Do something.
that was a miscommunication.
Is it the Senate Finance base,
Yes.
but the House weights?
We did not mean to change the sparsity weight. We agreed with what you, and that was a miscommunication.
Can I ask then, I guess I'd say, is the ask then for the House weight, or is it Senate weights except that the sparsity weight would be different?
The only thing we really were intending to do was to add in the high school weight of 0.10 and add in a CTE weight of 1.
And leave the,
And then have the base change accordingly to stay within the.
Which is where you got to the 14.
to change the base to. You just like subtract it from the base and then divide it?
No. Secondary weight, CT weight, and then a base calculated so that it fits within the existing education spending of 1.88.
That's very confusing math for me.
Oh, we didn't do the math.
No, I understand the multiplication and the division. So the other weights that you're leaving, and are agreeing to,
Poverty, ELA.
sure, those mean something very different as a dollar figure if you've lowered the base. Okay,
So we had talked with you about that one and said that we need to have we need a high school weight and we need to have a CTE weight. And one rationale, if we take the CTE weight, for example, plugging in 1 is a lot closer to where we're going to end up in the end after a study or whatever than 0.
what?
And that's in.
I don't say that again.
That is within the existing, like the 1.8 million that we're spending now, there's a CTE cost that's built into that.
Yes,
And we wanted to reflect it in the weight because there's going to be a CTE weight
why do you think there's going to be a CTE weight?
as opposed to where would the money come from otherwise.
Could come from districts, it could come from a categorical grant. There's lots of ways that CTE is paid for. I haven't, CTE weight is fairly counterindicated in the literature.
But right now it comes out of the 1.88 formula.
Sure, and in the future it could too. I'm just saying the assumption of a weight seems like a leap.
Well,
Okay.
we do a study and the study recommends we do a categorical grant in lieu of, I mean, fine with me. But it's not
What's going to be paid for?
it's part of the 1.88 right now, and if we don't account for it right now, then we've got to.
I think it's accounted for in our proposal too. Okay, let's keep on going.
Okay.
I think I understand what you're proposing.
All right, so are we to disregard this small school stuff? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that was.
Yes, that's our
That
miscommunication.
was our miscommunication.
So do you then want support grants for those?
For the sparsity.
Yep.
Yeah,
What?
for sparsity, that they're,
We're doing the thing we agreed on this morning.
Yeah.
That was a mis.
yeah, and that's a grant, correct?
Yep, the
Yeah,
sparsity.
that's fine.
School.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about the CTE and the secondary weights, not the
And
small schools.
so how does a CTE weight work for a student? Like, can you tell me the story of a student and how the dollars are moving around?
It's on an FTE basis. So if most of our CTs are not a full, well, they might be depending on how they, but, so they're, there for half the time, it's a half FTE.
So, okay, let's say we have a student who is an English language learner and they attend the CTE.
Okay.
I'm gonna say half the time because that seems easier math.
Okay.
What is the English, are you taking, how would the dollars get divided up?
Okay, so in that case, where for kids, say the kids at South Burlington High School
Mhm.
is an English language learner and a CTE student and they spend half the day at Burlington
Mhm.
School District. Then the base and weights for the kid for half.
Both weights.
Half.
Okay.
Half, yep.
Okay.
Would follow the student to that CTE center. And then that student would also qualify as half of an FTE. So the half of the weight applied, half a weight applied to the base would be the additional CTE dollars that CTE center would receive.
And would they receive their English language services in both places?
Well, if they needed them,
Okay.
yes, and then that's maybe half of that weight applied to the base would go to the student. Yeah. Money just follows the kid.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're saying a CTE weight of 1, meaning that student is already a 1 and should be additive of another 1. Additive. We may have jumped the gun here. I'm not sure if we got it.
Slide.
Continue on, please, John.
Let's do it. All right. Probably not going to be especially useful for me to go through this section then, so I will, but you can see here that the EL weights are those, the health side, which is ultimately where Senate Finance had ended up, including the newcomer side as well. We can ignore the small school piece. I did want to flag just, I think this is especially
What page are you? Sorry, I can see 10. Thank you.
in the House proposal, this subsection F would be at the end of the weighting section and describe the determination of educational opportunity payment. And that would be your base times your weighted long-term membership rate. And the natural place, the reason it's included there is because this is your weighting section. So you have your weights at the point and you just multiply by the base. Here, it's the foundation amount, right, that's being determined. And that is what is multiplied by your pre-percentage to determine the school district's ELP. Subsection H, this is the recalibration section, which has been struck.
Oh, you don't, why don't you want to recalibrate the weights? Not you, John.
Yep.
I'm looking at the senators. Sorry. I'm imagining you have no desires about it.
Oh, I don't think. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't
Okay.
think we meant not to recalibrate. We know it's need to get recalibrated.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we've had some conversations in internally about, do we want to update weights prior to districts getting going, but I don't, not in a position to take them.
Okay.
They can stay, yeah.
I'm sorry to do this to you for a moment, John, but I just want to go back to the CTE weight again. How did you pick the weight you picked?
How did it happen?
It was recommended by the APA.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what came from the United Senate. That Senate Finance. We both had the one.
It was less than what, in their original EB model, I think it was 1.3.
And then do you know what evidence they used to lower it?
I don't know the
Okay.
calculation math behind
Okay,
it.
thank you. Back to you, John, so sorry.
No, it's all good. I will not offer anything here. I'll just keep going. Section 35A, this is where actually a lot of the conversation has already been. This is your dependent CTE weight. And so you see
Oh, we did change it.
PTE pupils, those pupils eligible for their technical education. And as you know, the weighting section is divided into two pieces, right? You're counting up students within particular categories and then applying weights for folks who fall within those categories. What we're seeing here is the tasking of listing for each school district that number of full-time equivalent counts. And then the actual weight itself, the school district would receive an additional weighting amount of less than 0 for each primary CTE pupil. Wait, conversations already been had. Okay. Section 36. There's not going to be anything to see here in terms of highlighted language. I did just want to call out, and sounds like I should step this, but the reason there's a difference between this and the House proposal is that this calls out the appropriation of funds, and in the House proposal that had been including support grants, right? And here I didn't have those called out because I had understood the request to have weights, but I can easily not step up. Okay, so some of those we've already addressed. I did try to call out sections. I haven't included text for just to say these are the same as the House or not, try to make this easier to read. What you're seeing in section 37 that I have highlighted, I had understood the support grants to be structured, but I will not do that. Sections 38 through 40, same as the House, so conforming changes for updates to the new foundation formula. Section 41, this is your budgetary vote section. So this sets up the actual form of the ballot for the vote. And it's important that we now have a new structure, and there's some additional information that will be provided with this ballot. So one is
the ballot good at everyone? In what circumstances are the votes happening?
So if you are, let's go back to this. Each school district should be voting on the percentage of the foundation amount to determine its EOP, right? So it would have that vote of 90 to 100%, or in those first years, 85, depending on you're in the first year of the foundation formula rollout.
So they would be voting on, no matter the percent.
Everyone would be voting under this.
There's not a default to 100.
There is no default to 100, and I'll come to that later. That's outside the scope of this section.
Thank you.
So in this case, there would be a budget presented, except for school districts that don't operate any grades. We talked about before that tuitioning section and how we weren't going to, the proposal was that you would prorate for whatever the approved percentage is, so that if you're a truly non-operating district, you would have to provide to a receiving school 100% of the base amount. And so those school districts are not voting. Everyone else is voting on the approved percentage. And so what you see here is a ballot that would.
Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, in this context, sometimes I think of voting, especially in the context of school budgets, as sort of a form of consent to taxation. And maybe that's me overthinking the philosophy of taxes.
What's the question?
The idea that there would be that everyone in the state needs to essentially vote for their school taxes, except in these very specific circumstances where they don't vote for their school taxes, but it's still at 100%. I understood why you set it at 100% in those situations, but the idea that there would be no vote in just that singular circumstance strikes me as confusing.
I'm not sure I remember what.
Yeah. So I think Senator Beck was the one who I first spoke with about this, that I don't know if you want
So do you have an answer, Senator Beck?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question right now. Can you?
And again, maybe I've thought about the philosophy of property taxes a little
Yeah.
too much over the last 2 years, right? 2 o'clock in the morning, et cetera. But I, in some ways, think of the vote for the school budget. And I think I've heard other people talk about this, as essentially you're consenting to taxation. You're consenting to that property tax rate. And I think some towns think of it that way and some towns don't think of it that way, but I think that's not a brand new idea I'm introducing here. And so the idea that in the majority of districts under your construct, folks are voting, whether they're getting the full, what's the new thing called?
Foundation.
The new foundation amount, or they're voting for the education opportunity payments on either end. All those folks would vote, except for this one very specific circumstance of a non-operating district, that those folks would not be consenting to their tax rate. And I'm wondering why you've decided to do that.
Well, they can, we haven't prevented a school that doesn't operate a district that doesn't operate any public schools from voting for supplemental. They may do that.
I thought supplemental was out.
On a supplemental.
No,
Well, it's supplemental of the law.
Section, yeah.
no, supplemental's still in. I think we took your 10 down to 5. So they do have the option to vote for supplemental spending if they so chose to do that. We're not giving them the option in this construct to go less than 100% because.
I understand why. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so I guess if what you're saying is, in the case of a school district that does not operate any schools at all, their only option, they're gonna receive 100% of the EOP. They're gonna get taxed like they're.
And why wouldn't they vote for that tax if everyone else in the whole state is?
Well, I suppose they could, but if they vote no, they're still going to receive it. I mean, if they voted no, I guess the only thing that they could do at that point is run that ballot, run it back out to the voters or ask for more, but.
I guess under the other constructs, what happens if someone votes, what if a district votes no?
If a district votes no, my understanding.
8%, what happens if a district votes no?
Well, let's talk about when we get to in perpetuity.
Okay.
Let's say a district doesn't vote, let's say a district cannot pass a ballot item. Then they would receive the minimum percentage of EOP until they can pass. They
wouldn't get 100%.
No,
I was thinking logically.
they would get the lower. That's my understanding.
Okay.
That's how it's
Yeah.
structured?
We're asking what the interim or fallback rate is if you don't.
If you don't pass a
If you
budget.
don't pass the vote, not.
Yeah,
You get the full EOP, right?
90%.
No, you get 90%. If you can't pass it, let's say you go on the ballot and you can't pass 100% or 98% or 92%.
But if you're a fully tuitioning district and you can't pass a budget, you get 100%. You don't even have to vote for the 100%.
You don't have to. They just get that.
But you could vote for 100% if you decided to run that vote in your town.
You
Because if
could.
I could only run every 4 years, I probably wouldn't run every 2 years.
I get it. No, I mean, that district that does not operate any public schools, they are going to receive 100%. It would not require I don't think it would require a vote of the town. They're going to receive it. The only thing they would vote for, if they chose to, would be to vote for supplemental.
Okay, I think I understand now.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump back in. The construct I thought we were thinking here that you were proposing, and just looking at your quizzical look, and maybe we might be on the same page, was that you were voting as to whether you wanted to have a lower amount, and if you
Right.
voted no, then you got 100%.
My interpretation is you vote for whatever percent you want. You want 100%, you got to vote for 100%.
Why don't we just go to
Yeah,
current law?
that changes. Yeah, I thought you don't vote, you get the foundation formula, you don't vote on whether or not you want the foundation formula. The state has taken control. We are going to raise the money, set the tax rate for the foundation formula. We're trying to find a way for those financially poor towns to spend less.
And I absolutely appreciate that.
Or the towns, this is the shock value, the towns. If we do this right, nobody's gonna have a problem when we get to the end. To vote to spend a little more, or you put in a bond vote, or you ban uniforms, whatever. Need to pave the parking lot.
That seems that.
But we've got to figure out that word.
I also don't think that was the main point here. The main point was just having the option to vote low, like.
Okay.
Exactly how.
The details
What the,
matter.
I understand, but what the
Okay.
default is something that it's not like, we can talk about that.
Okay,
That was not the point.
okay.
But in the language that's drafted, John, it's, you can't pass 97%. And the district's going to receive 90%
That's correct.
until or if they pass a budget for it.
Unless
Right.
they're a fully tuitioning district.
Unless they're.
And it's,
That's good.
Okay, great. Let's,
That's the language right now.
okay, let's keep on trying to understand what else is in here for all of us.
Okay, so what would that vote look like? The first of these is your vote on foundation amount. So it would pose to the voters, do they approve to expend a particular percentage of the foundation amount, right? So they're voting on a percentage. That is what the school board is determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year, and which equals, and it would spell out what the actual budgetary amount is, but the direct vote is on percentage of the foundation amount. And the reason for that is because the tie is between the percentage you vote on your foundation amount and the percentage of the homestead property tax rate that you pay. And so what you see in this next paragraph, district estimates that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in a homestead property tax rate of whatever it might be for $100 by such education property value, which is, and it would be the same percentage of the uniform homestead property tax rate. So if you voted 90% of the foundation amount, you would receive a homestead property tax rate at 90% of that uniform homestead property tax rate. If you vote 95%, you get 95% of the homestead property tax rate, 100% uniform homestead property tax rate. That's it.
And Senator Cummings? So in other versions of both what the administration gave to us, and I think what we all voted on, the homestead rate and the non-homestead rates or rate, depending on what proposal you look at, are all, we've really like corrected things so that they're all moving together. What I see you doing here is deviating in that the homestead property tax rate would be higher than the non-homestead rate or lower than the homestead rate, depending on this vote. Is that what is happening here, John?
It could be. It would depend on the relationship between the uniform non-homestead and the uniform homestead. So there would still be a choice as to how much liability is assigned to the different rates. But
At a state level?
yes, but you're correct that depending, like, if you, let's say they were set at the same, or then you would have an effect. You could move below the threshold if you voted down, right?
Again, is an attempt to help the towns.
Mhm.
And when we get there, there may be a few of the poorer towns that in order to pay that statewide base rate are going to be severely strained. And I think what we're trying to do is find a way for them to reduce their rate.
I really do appreciate that effort so much. This is a lot of very brand new policy and significant deviations from what's been discussed previously at this point in the day. So I'm gonna try to chill in my questions and let John explain them.
I like that, but, you know, I like, I like everything. All right. That's my safe answer, or response. So next, the budget here, the second budget book you're gonna see is gonna look awfully familiar. This is the same thing that you see in the House proposal, but if, for instance, if a board determined that additional spending is necessary in excess of 100% of the foundation amount, meaning that they voted 100% on the first vote, the board would present a supplemental district spending budget to the voters, and it would be the same form of budget that we would have seen in the House proposal for the supplemental district spending. And so you would be able to, the local voters would be able to see what local rate is required, what supplemental district spending tax rate is required to raise the amount that they're voting in supplemental district spending. So nothing new in that, in the second bucket that we do. Section 42 is a slight difference from the equivalent section 42 in the House proposal. In the House proposal, we repealed the census block grants for special education because you have the special education rates, but those are not included in this proposal, so you're not repealing the census block grants.
Do you know how districts right now are covering a lot of special education costs out of their education spending separate from the block grants?
Yep.
How will that work in this? How will they cover those costs that they're legally obligated to?
Well, if they're, when census block grants were done, they were supposed to pay for all special education except for the extraordinary needs.
Yeah.
Some districts are there. Other districts are not, we know that. And so for those districts that it's not covering, it's coming out of their education spending. In this construct, if they are not doing it with their census block grant, it would come out of their EOP, basically. So no change effectively.
Well, I think effectively it's a big change, but okay, thank you.
Why is it, just so I understand, why is it a big change?
I swear I just let John finish and then I'll
Okay.
go back on that, but so right now, districts are, able to request and or raise any dollars that they need to meet their budgets. Districts are under contractual obligations with each individual family that's under an IEP and under multiple legal requirements with the feds to maintain that spending. And so given that those are not flexible, flexibility is needed on the other. Given that those obligations are not flexible, the spending needs to be flexible, at least for quite a few number of years until they
You have
can bring that back in line. Yeah,
They have supplemental.
what?
They have supplemental.
It does a supplemental account for the variations in special ed spending around the state. I just. haven't done
Depends on
that.
what the district's variation is, I suppose.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like how you stop screen sharing whenever you talk for the viewing
I'm
audience.
trying,
It's kind of.
Section 43, same as the House. Your reports from AOE and JFO are the same as the House. I don't know same as the House for two of these sections. I think there may be agreement, but I am just listing those here and not providing the text because they don't speak to the proposal that's in front of you. But I will note that section 45B, your EOP transition across several years, moving folks up and down based on whether ed spending is relative to EOP. That would be struck, and just the conceptual reason for this is that you're allowing folks to voluntarily transition themselves is the idea here, right? Particularly in those early years, if you have down to 85 in the first year, for instance. So the thinking was don't need to provide that same transition because folks are voting themselves the transition that they would ask for. We next come to section 46, which we're jumping to title 32 now. So we're jumping into the taxation sections, and in particular, we're talking about supplemental district spending. You're going to see some highlighting here that some of it is not a substantive change, and some of it actually reflects where I think there might already be agreement. First of these is the statewide adjustment. We spoke a little bit about this yesterday, but just ensuring that that's retained for the future. And let's see. You're going to see some highlighting here for the supplemental district spending. This is not a substantive difference for the House proposal. This is just some clarifying terms that were included in Senator Beck's amendment from Friday past. So 5% was, I think, the figure that we talked about for supplemental district spending cap. And what you see in the,
Senator Beck's amendment from the floor?
Yeah.
From the Senate floor that didn't pass? Okay, thank you.
when we've referenced in the House what the cap is set at, we've talked about whether that's weighted or unweighted. And I think there's been this base times the just long-term membership and unweighted cap. And so I've just included a defined term here, unweighted foundation amount, which is the base times the long-term membership. And that way you can just say more simply that the cap is 5% of that unweighted foundation amount. So I think hopefully more intuitive to folks as to what it is. Section 46A is your cap transition. So in the early years, we would have a higher cap. We just noted it was 5% of that unweighted foundation amount. And then in the transition here, you see the beginning with the first year of foundation formula rollout as proposed in fiscal year 29, it would be at 10%, and that would move down by 1% each year, so that in fiscal year 2034, you would reach that 5% cap. I think the House proposal had been for that rollout to happen starting in 2034 and going to 2039. But it's the same concept of lowering your cap over time. Down to 5%.
Our intent was only to get to the same place you were, there was something, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Section 47, this is the imposition of the statewide education tax rates. You're going to see a couple of things here. The first is that there's no concept here of the property tax classifications, which I believe were in the House proposal. So there's a table that you're going to follow with factors. What this is saying is you would set a uniform tax rate for non-homestead and a uniform tax rate for homestead. You'll recall earlier when we were talking about the budgetary vote, whether that could move you up or down relative to the non-homestead rate. This is what I was referencing. This doesn't specify a particular relationship between the non-homestead and homestead. There's no fixed factor. So the legislature could choose the amount of liability that how much it puts on each rate. You will see a good bit of highlighting here, but I think much of it is flowing through from the definition you just saw. So for instance, the highlighting relating to dividing by a number resulting from dividing the CLA by the statewide adjustment, that's just staying in that statewide adjustment language. The real substantive change that you see here is from the approved percentage, the discussion we've been having about voting that foundation amount. So for your homestead property rate, when the commissioner is setting your homestead rate, they're taking that uniform rate that is set above, right? The legislature has to set that. They're taking that and multiplying it by municipalities' approved percentage to get that discount based on what the voting rate was. I mean, a lot of conforming changes throughout this section, so hopefully I can go pretty quickly. This is just picking up the statewide adjustment. And I will come to a piece later that speaks to just making sure that the math behind that works correctly. This has been a subject of much discussion up to this point. So this is your interim rate. What happens if you haven't voted a budget? And so if the district hasn't voted a budget by June 30th, this is page 22, an interim homestead education tax shall be imposed at 90% of that uniform homestead property tax rate. Again, we would apply the statewide adjustment, but this is the default. That's something 90%.
That default could be different too, so that's not a.
I did want to note that these sections you're seeing here are technical provisions. This is struck in the House proposal because there's a uniform rate. These are the technical provisions that we include to ensure that a municipality that is a member of multiple, say, union school districts and needs to have a weighted rate, that those are picked up because you're now accounting for variation in homestead rate on that voted foundation amount. You need to make sure that you.
And this is current law, basically.
This is current law. It's just picking up the transcript. That's right. This is using current law, but just referencing the proper rates here. And so pick up the approved percentage. And again, it would also have to pick up the statewide adjustment.
I'm going to ask that when the clock strikes 4, we take a 15-minute recess, please.
So yeah,
You don't have to explain.
all these
the
technical
changes.
provisions.
Did you all solve the problem that you raised earlier, Senator Beck, of what to happen if what the default is if the legislature doesn't vote on a rate?
No, that's still an outstanding question.
Okay. And is all that's left conforming changes?
I have a little bit more, but I think I can be pretty quick. Forming changes here. I did want to speak to the determined one letter. So I mentioned before, with the inclusion of the statewide adjustment, under this shortly. In the House proposal, what's recommended is a statewide education property tax rate that is adjusted for different factors. What you see here is you got to recommend non-homestead rates. But I did want to call out that when you're setting that property tax rate, you need to divide it by the statewide adjustment to ensure that when you are netting out that statewide adjustment, the math works out. So it has to be picked up in the December 1 letter. It's an assumption built into setting the rate. In the House's proposal, you have a homestead property tax rate transition that would be struck again for the same reasons above, allowing folks to control their transition, and these are just conforming changes here. Lastly, the last substantive changes here, variable growth in education spending for fiscal years 27 and 28. So what to do in the fiscal years immediately preceding the proposed foundation formula rollout. This would hopefully be a familiar concept to folks, but for those fiscal years, excess spending would be your per pupil ed spending, adjusted to include amounts from a capital construction reserve that is in excess of the district's per pupil ed spending plus their variable growth. So this is accounting for growth within that excess spending. And what we have is a hopefully familiar definition here that variable growth is an amount equal to the actual amount of ed spending in the district in the prior fiscal year multiplied by a variable growth percentage. And they would be floored at a rate that would be the change in the NIPA price inflator over the preceding fiscal year. The variable growth percentage would be what results from taking the highest per education spending in any district in the state, divided by the actual amount of spending in that district in the entire fiscal year -1. So you're getting the gap between that district and the highest spending district, right? Multiply that by 5.5%. And that is giving you your variable growth percentage, which is added right to this year. So try to-
Why 5.5%?
It's what was in, it's what was used in Act 46. We're not necessarily wed to it. If you think another number looks better. In Act 46, they used 5.5, and there was no minimum. The top had 0. We thought that making sure everybody at least had NIPA was a little more fair than 0. But yeah, but the 5.5 is just a carryover from Act 46.
Do you remember why Act 46 used 5.5%?
No.
Very last quick things. If you're using this piece, then you need to repeal the suspension of excess spending penalty. Just currently in place, and then just I don't have the actual effective date section, but just wanted to call out the obvious timing difference here. So we have an FY 30 foundation formula rollout at the FY 29, which starts July 1, 28. And that is what I have for you guys.
Thanks, John.
We do
Is that a roll call for you?
Just sort of.
Or just the board? Okay.
Breaker.
When do you want us to,
15 minutes maybe?
That's your
Is that-
15.